Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well on this amazing summer Thursday. I want to I want to start off and say, forgive me. My first child just started daycare this week, and also just started teething for some reason this week. So sleep it was working, and now it's out the window. So I'm propped up on caffeine and a ton of water. So bear that in mind. But my name is Jason Brand. I am the Director of Outreach and Partner Development here at Supply Chain Solutions, and we do a weekly show. And this week, it is the Freight Market Roundup. So if you've been with us on this show before, it is a quick and dirty breakdown of rates at major events we're seeing. And yeah, we love it. We try to get it in 15 minutes. And we've got a format we keep to keep everyone organized on what we're doing. So if you're new to the show, let me quick run you through that. So first things we're going to do is we are going to run through the ocean rates we are seeing on all of the major lanes that we cover. After I go through all of the major ocean lanes, we are going to talk about some of the major events that are affecting our customers and ourselves in the marketplace. And then also, we really like to talk about trends, what we're seeing, what we're predicting, things along those lines. Occasionally, we can't really talk too much about trends simply because, if there's a lot changing at that moment, it's kind of a bad time to make a prediction. You kind of have to wait a second and see how things are playing out to, kind of show, hey, opportunity, or hey, get out of this situation. But we do have a lot to cover. 15 minutes can be a pretty tall order. So let's get this show on the road without further delay. So ocean shipping lanes first. If you are a customer of ours and you're shipping on the Trans-Pacific lane as of last week, which, as a reminder, think about Southeast Asia and China coming across the Pacific into the U.S. West Coast. Specifically, that is what we're talking about now. I'm sure if you've been shipping on that lane, you know the pain you've been experiencing and those high rates. And, while it's not the most painful major shipping lane at the moment, it is getting pretty unbelievably expensive to ocean import into the U.S. And unfortunately, we've all been down this road, and we've all been down this road pretty recently, as a matter of fact. But as of just last week, our shipment averages were all the way up to $7,800 per 40-foot container. And that is over a 30% increase in cost month over month. Now, remarkably, at the same time, we're still seeing a pretty high schedule reliability. So, capacity issues have been a main driving point of these high costs. But despite those capacity issues, still, we're seeing a pretty good high schedule reliability. So what we're seeing right now on this lane, it's pretty impressive. If we go back to February 24th, between then and now, we're actually 20 points higher, 20 percentage points higher on average for schedule reliability. And if we look at the reliability averages of each carrier over the course of that time, specifically on this lane, because they do change carrier lane by lane. You've got Evergreen at the moment that's averaging the most reliable carrier. They're sitting all the way up at almost 80% reliability, which is just phenomenal. And then you've got One High. One High's on the other end. They're at the lowest. So One High was barely getting 33% on time for their vessels. Now, there's a couple carriers who are excluded from this. And, we're not going to talk about those today, but we do need to kind of talk about some of these new kind of pop-up carriers that happen when the capacity issues strike, and kind of the services they offer, the costs they charge, and what that kind of entails in comparison. I think it's really critical because I know, obviously if you're a shipping provider, you're looking at all of these options. But if you're a customer, I'm also sure you're seeing these options as well. And you're like, hey, what's this? Why is this so much cheaper? Or why should we go this route? So we'll discuss that. But anyway, let's move on. I want to talk about another lane, specifically on the Trans-Pacific. And we've been talking about this one relatively more frequently lately. And that is our China, Southeast Asia, across the Pacific, but this time headed into the west coast of Mexico. And the reason we've been bringing this one up, because we haven't in the past really talked about that, is there has been this immense boom in freight costs that we were seeing, obviously, in the U.S. West Coast, but in other areas around the world as well. But specifically in the coastal Asia to West Coast Mexico regions, we saw a price increase that was just insanely steep. It was such a rapid and sustained price increase. Carriers were responding, throwing more boats at it, opening up new service lines. They did that multiple times, and it didn't slow down the price increase at all. We actually saw prices go up by over 280% in actually in slightly over 60 days. And there really wasn't any sign of it slowing down until now, actually. So we just saw the first price decrease in this lane since all the way back to March 19th. It's been on, steadily marching higher and higher and higher. Terrifyingly, not fun, but not fun when you're shipping for your customers. Hey, I'm sorry. It's just getting more expensive. But seriously, first price decrease since March 19th. And that just happened in the first week of July. So we saw, pardon me, rates flatten out at around $7,700 per FEU, and that happened on the last week of June. And then preceding that, first week of July, we saw roughly a $500 price decrease. So, obviously we've got this glaring US holiday that just happened during the same period. It's pretty safe to say that July 4th was likely a component in this price decrease. But given the history of this lane over the course of the year so far, and what we've been seeing in other lanes, we also could be approaching a glass ceiling of sorts, so to speak. So, week over week, we're going to talk about this lane. We'll stay focused on this. It could be a pretty cool canary in the coal mine, but there's also a couple other factors here that are playing into this price decrease, and it might actually speed up this price decrease. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So for the time being, let's continue on our topic of ocean shipping and ocean shipping rates. As a reminder, I generally say this in the beginning. This is not your cost from, okay, I got it from Shanghai to my door. That's not the cost. We are just talking about the ocean shipping portion. So when you hear $7,700, for example, and that was the shipment going into west coast of Mexico, you need to take a look at your invoice, and you need to make sure you're just going based on the ocean portion of the shipment. It's a little bit easier to have a good comparison and a trend discussion when we talk about just one portion at a time. When you're looking at the full shipments, there's so many variables that it's going to be a little bit apples to oranges, so to speak. And then you get into a couple other topics as well. But let's move on. Let's talk about transatlantic. Specifically, when we're talking about transatlantic on this show, we're talking about shipments leaving Europe and coming into the U.S. East Coast ports. Now, when we look at all the other lanes, the major lanes that we talk about on this show, you're seeing generally rate increases happening right now. The European ports to U.S. East Coast is the exception. And actually, it's been happening for many months now. We've been seeing this really slow degradation in price. So as of last week, a 40-foot container, just port to port, was $1,800. Now, that is much lower than we've seen in a very long time. It's not going down at an incredibly fast rate. It's only $50 to $100 on a weekly basis, but it is a very slow and just marching process as well. Now, before we get into any discussion about why that may be, let's first wrap up the ocean shipping discussion. So let's move on and let's focus on what is considered by many, and I think everyone would agree, to be currently the world's most frustrating lane. And that is our Chinese origins, specifically our coastal Chinese origins. So your Southeast Asia and your China. Coastal Asian origins, Southeast Asia and China, headed into Europe. Previously, our Suez Canal lane. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of challenges navigating this lane. And given everything that's been continuously going on with this lane, you'd expect these costs to be astronomically higher. But currently, they're pretty much in line with the Trans-Pacific lanes we discussed earlier. So as of last week, our customers paid roughly $7,900 per 40-foot equivalent unit, or FEU. And, that is despite avoiding the Suez Canal. That's also despite the substantial amounts of congestion at all of the transshipment points on this lane, which is very impressive. And the schedule reliability on this lane has made some pretty substantial improvements, but, as would be expected, there's no doubts it's still pretty low, and it needs a lot more improvement before it's at a healthy point. So across all of the carriers that reported their reliability and all of the reliability data that we can get our hands on, you've got a high across all carriers at 54% and a low in the 20% range. And I don't want to call it any names on this lane because it's obviously a very challenging lane at the moment for so many reasons. But yeah, apologies. This is the problem with wearing one of these watches. Everything comes right to your watch and it takes your attention off. Anyways, let's piggyback off that topic. So let's gear shift into what's going on in the market. And let's talk about this a little bit. So it is important to remember that, the figures of schedule reliability, they are inherently averages. We don't talk about daily. We don't talk about weekly. You really need to have a multiple month data set so you can see, what that number is really kind of settling into. If you're looking at a daily basis, this is going to change wildly. A weekly basis is going to change wildly. But there is a lot of factors that happen on a regular basis that, affect a carrier's or an ocean carrier's performance and their ability to arrive on time or not. Weather is obviously a massive affecting point for that. So, speaking of weather and speaking also of our Asian coastal origins headed into Europe lane, right now, most of those shipments that would go through the Suez, most are going around the southern tip of Africa, going through the Cape of Good Hope. And right at this moment, the Cape of Good Hope is getting just battered by a substantial weather system, an extremely substantial one, actually. There's over 33-foot high waves, and it's pretty much affected all of the traffic. Currently, there are 600 vessels that are being affected by this. You've got most of them that have had to backtrack to get to a situation of cover where they can just kind of wait the weather system through. But there's also a pretty substantial amount of them that have just decided to be rerouted again, and they're going a totally different route. Definitely a painful experience on a lane that is causing, quite frankly, the world ocean shipping environment a lot of pain in general right now by soaking up so much capacity. So this is kind of a tough one. Let's just kind of hope this can move through. We can get back to those 600 vessels getting to their origins within a timely manner, or their destinations, in a timely manner. So let's continue on weather. Ports of Houston and Galveston, Texas, they're going to remain closed, or they did remain closed on Tuesday this week because of Hurricane Beryl, which made landfall as a Category 1 hurricane, which happened on Monday. The Port of Houston did announce that they were going to resume operations yesterday, and they were going to be offering extended gate hours to hopefully alleviate some of the backlog that was created from that closure. Beryl did a little bit of damage. It brought some substantial flooding. It brought 94-mile-per-hour winds. It knocked out power to more than 2.5 million homes and businesses. So a little bit of a cleanup is in play. Let's stay geographically close with this one, but let's talk a little bit about U.S.-Mexico relations. So just a couple of days ago, the U.S. has officially imposed a new tariff on Chinese steel, specifically steel that is shipped through Mexico. Now, this new tariff is coming in at the tune of a 25% increase, and it was announced jointly with the Mexican President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. And in their announcement, they made it very clear that the reason for this tariff is because there's been a lot of evasion of the Chinese tariff. So this is kind of protecting against Chinese companies evading that U.S.-China tariff on steel and going through Mexico as a result. Now, to kind of zoom in on how this is going to affect U.S. importers, and a little factoid here, last year, the U.S. imported nearly $3 billion worth of steel, aluminum, and other metals from Mexico. But that is just through one crossing. That's just the numbers through the Laredo crossing. So the actual number is higher, and it's definitely going to have an effect on U.S. importers, and it's going to be felt actually relatively soon. So, these are just a couple of the major events. There's a lot of other things going on that we just don't have time to cover on the show today, but I will be covering them in the future. But I want to kind of mention a couple bullet points of things that you really need to keep your eyes on because they're major. We've talked about them on previous shows, so we're kind of taking a break this week from it, but we'll be right back to those because so many events are occurring. Quick, we got to talk about the ILA Port Labor Union. The ILA Port Labor Union, it still has a very high chance of striking at the end of September. So if you are shipping, you need to, and if you're shipping specifically into the US East Coast, you've got to have a backup plan. Come September 30th, if this is not a figured out contract for the longshoremen labor, there is going to be a strike. They've made it extremely clear that will be the case. So make sure you got a backup plan if you're shipping in the US East Coast. And then also Canada, there has just been a flurry of labor union battles. We've been watching this over the past couple of months, and they're happening all, at similar times here, which is making it a little challenging, I think, for the business community to understand, can we comfortably ship through Canada or should we avoid it? At the current time, we just avoided one strike, but that does not mean we're in the clear. You should consider using a US port of entry for the time being until things calm down a little bit. But that is the very shortest answer I can give on that. We'll talk a little bit more about that topic in the coming weeks. So stay tuned. Now, let's move it on. Let's get this show wrapped up. Let's talk about air freight and what's going on in that marketplace and the rates we're seeing. Now, we're going to be focusing on our Southeast Asia and Chinese origins, but currently, our customers are paying an average of $6.29 a kilo when shipping into the US from those origins. But when we look across all origin destination pairs, we're actually seeing a low of $5.62 a kilo and a high of $6.77 a kilo. A lot lower than we've been seeing in the past few weeks. There's no doubt this was slightly affected by the holiday, and there's also no doubt that this number will increase in the coming weeks. So if you are needing to airship, contact us right away because those numbers are going to increase pretty quickly. And that's what we got for the show today. 16 minutes. We almost hit our 15-minute goal. We really appreciate all of you joining us. We're live every Thursday at 1 p.m. Every other week, we do the Freight Market Roundup where we run through the rates we're seeing in air and ocean, but we also touch on a couple major topics that our customers are getting affected by, as I mentioned. And the weeks in between, we dive deep into some of the other topics, which one of those will be the Canada port labor and beyond port labor, just labor contract negotiations going on right now. Thank you so much for joining us today, and make it a great week.